I've noticed recently a small trend of government surveillance type games showing up on Steam. We've had Orwell, Replica, and now we have Mainlining. Mainlining is a game about working as a government agent that is tasked with hacking into citizens' computers to find evidence that will lead to their arrest. Think of it as a combination of Hacknet and Orwell. The main interface for the game consists of a fully realized desktop. You can use a web browser, flip through the citizen registry, and most importantly, use a hacking console to break into different websites. Ultimately, you will have to get evidence for a crime, along with the perpetrator's whereabouts, so as to have them arrested. The basic mechanics are nothing new. The console interface is a slightly less complex version of systems that can be seen in games like Hacknet and the much older Uplink. Having a graphical user interface to go along with the console is reminiscent of the interfaces of games like Orwell and Replica, which are far more user-friendly to players that are less comfortable in the world of coding. The really interesting part of Mainlining's format is the combination of the console and desktop elements. Other games I've been mentioning have all focused on one of those two elements, whereas Mainlining has, I would say rather successfully, integrated the two systems into a coherent and functional game. Moving to the more thematic elements of the game, Mainlining focuses on questions of government surveillance. Putting the player in the shoes of an agent spying on citizens is nothing new, as games like Orwell and Replica, as I've mentioned before, have already dealt with such themes. Where Mainlining deviates is the general neutrality with which the game deals with the morality of government surveillance. Replica was clearly against surveillance, and Orwell, although more neutral than Replica, seemed to also trend towards an anti-surveillance stance. Mainlining, on the other hand, puts the player in the position of just doing their job. This leaves the morality in a gray area. I personally find this interesting, as it allows the arguments from in-game coworkers and radical anti-government groups in the game to play out in a more even field than could be seen in Orwell or Replica. Now that we've gone over the basic elements of the game, let's talk about how I felt about the game after having played it. It was good, but I would say it lacked the depth that I expected going into it. I was hoping for an experience closer to Hacknet with in-depth hacking and file searching. What was ultimately delivered ended up being a decent but not as robust hacking mechanism. The most the player will hack things is to type in IP addresses to access the data on different people's computers. From there, it's just reading the documents to get tidbits of information. While that might have sounded like a rather negative statement, I actually didn't have a big issue with the hacking element of the game. Mainlining played the best when it was moving at a decent click, with there being a lot to read and think about. The limited hacking interface, especially in comparison to games that focus on the act of hacking, like Hacknet and Uplink, meant that the game moved at a speed that kept it engaging. In terms of the storytelling, I found it a bit dry. The characters talk to the player through a chat feature on the side of your desktop. In the end, the characters really seemed to boil down to loose archetypes. One character was the sarcastic, cynical employee, who was always at odds with the serious boss-type character. None of them were given the time to really develop, and quite frankly, it didn't seem that there was much to develop in the characters to begin with. Oftentimes, I found listening to the coworkers was more of a chore than it was an interesting experience. Despite this, I will admit the coworkers don't actually talk to the player all that much. Most of it is just the hacking and interface that is the gameplay in Mainlining. So although it's slightly annoying to have characters that aren't really all that fleshed out, playing in essence archetypal roles, that wasn't too detracting from the game overall. There were a few more technical issues with the game. The first that should be noted is one bug that I ran into a few times while playing. In essence, certain windows would flicker if they were overlapped with one another. It was an easy fix, as you could just close one of the windows, but it was a nuisance as you had to close a window and lose where you were. However, the other two technical elements that I found problematic were more concerning. One was the game's built-in notes system. The text editor that is used to write in it is so rudimentary that I would recommend to get a paper and pencil instead. The problem lies in not being able to move your cursor throughout the text. You either write directly after the last thing you typed, or you delete your way to what you want to edit. For a note-taking system where the written information is likely to need to be edited and changed, it just doesn't work. The other is the level-based nature of the game. In essence, the game is divided into levels in which you need to make one arrest. Upon arresting the person, all information that you had, even your notes, are deleted. You can't keep URLs or data between levels unless you write it down physically. For the most part, this was okay, but when you're told to look at our web page and you don't recall the URL to that particular web page, it is certainly an annoyance. To sum up my experience, Mainlining is not a groundbreaking game. It certainly tries to be more interesting than a copy and paste platformer or shooter, which I certainly appreciate. For whatever flaws it might have, it definitely overcomes them by actually being quite an enjoyable experience to play. The controls are easy to learn, and most of the puzzles are complex enough to give a feeling of accomplishment while not hanging the player up in obtuse problem solving, which is definitely a plus. If you feel the need to hack a few computers, this is an accessible and pretty decent game for $10. Thanks for watching, and of course, as always, enjoy the rest of your day.